Kethver sat in the dim chamber of the Galactic Council, his forearms trembling as he prepared to speak. The purple scales on his face had lost their shine years ago, dulled by memories that haunted his sleep. Around him, representatives from dozens of worlds waited in silence. They all knew what happened to the Zephyrian Empire. They needed to hear how. "I was there when we first found them," Kethver began, his voice barely above a whisper. "The humans. We thought they would be easy. We were so very wrong." The council chamber remained quiet as Kethver closed his eyes, remembering that terrible day 3 years ago when everything changed. The Zephyrian Third Fleet had been the pride of the Empire. 50 massive warships equipped with plasma cannons that could melt mountains, energy shields that had never been broken, soldiers who had conquered 47 worlds without a single defeat. Admiral Vexthul commanded from the flagship Eternal Victory, confident that this new world called Earth would surrender within hours. Kethver had been a young intelligence officer then, eager to prove himself. His job was simple: scan the primitive human settlements and identify their leaders for capture. The humans barely had space travel. Their largest ships were crude metal tubes powered by explosive chemicals. Their weapons were kinetic projectiles, bullets and missiles that seemed laughably outdated compared to Zephyrian energy weapons. "We expected them to kneel," Kethver told the council. "Every species we had ever encountered understood the logic of surrender when faced with superior force. The humans did not understand this logic. The first contact happened near the red planet the humans called Mars. A small human vessel appeared on their sensors, maybe 50 meters long compared to the kilometer-long Zephyrian ships. Admiral Vexthul opened communications, expecting the usual terrified pleas for mercy. Instead, a human face appeared on the screen. The man had short brown hair and calm blue eyes. He wore a simple blue uniform with the name Morrison printed on it. Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Liberty looked directly at Admiral Vexthul and spoke in clear, measured tones. "This is Captain Morrison of the Earth Defense Force. You are in human territory. Leave now, or we will consider your presence an act of war." The Zephyrian bridge fell silent. Then Admiral Vexthul began to laugh. His officers joined in, their clicking sounds echoing through the command center. A single tiny ship threatening the entire Third Fleet was beyond ridiculous. "Human," Admiral Vexthul replied. "Your world belongs to the Zephyrian Empire now. Surrender your vessel and prepare for occupation protocols." Captain Morrison's expression did not change. "I gave you a chance to leave peacefully. You chose war." What happened next changed everything. Kethver thought he knew about warfare. The Liberty turned directly toward the Eternal Victory and accelerated at maximum burn. The human ship's engines glowed white-hot as Morrison pushed them beyond safe limits. Admiral Vexthul ordered his weapons officer to destroy the approaching vessel. But something was wrong with the targeting system. The Liberty's hull began to break apart from the extreme acceleration. But Morrison held course. Pieces of his ship scattered into space as the vessel literally tore itself apart, yet it kept coming. At the last second, Admiral Vexthul realized what the human intended. The Liberty struck the Eternal Victory's primary weapon array at nearly 10% of light speed. The explosion vaporized both ships instantly and sent shockwaves through the entire Zephyrian formation. In one moment of insane courage, Captain Jake Morrison had destroyed the fleet's most powerful vessel and taken the flagship's commanding officer with him. No species had ever done this before, Kethver explained to the Silent Council. Ramming attacks were theoretical suicide tactics that military scholars discussed, but never expected to see. Captain Morrison turned his ship into a guided missile without hesitation. He chose certain death to damage our fleet. The Zephyrian Third Fleet regrouped, but the easy confidence was gone. Command fell to Sub-Admiral Drexcol, who immediately ordered a full assault on Earth's orbital defenses. The plan was simple: destroy their space stations and orbital platforms, then demand surrender before beginning surface bombardment. The humans had other ideas. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes coordinated Earth's defense from Luna Base on their moon. She was a small woman with short red hair and green eyes that seemed to burn with determination. Hayes had studied every battle the Zephyrians had ever fought, learning their tactics from intercepted communications and refugee testimonies. While the Zephyrian ships moved in perfect formations using standard battle doctrine, Hayes deployed human defenders in patterns that made no tactical sense. Instead of meeting the alien fleet in open space, human vessels scattered throughout the asteroid belt and orbital debris fields around Earth. Commander Nick Bradley led a squadron of converted civilian ships that had been hastily fitted with weapons. His vessels were mining craft and cargo haulers that should have been helpless against military warships. Instead, Bradley used them like wolves hunting a herd, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing into asteroid fields before the Zephyrians could respond. Their tactics were chaos, Kethfer remembered. We could not predict their movements because they followed no military logic we understood. Commander Bradley would sacrifice 3 ships to damage one of ours, treating the exchange as a victory instead of a loss. The battle raged for 18 hours. Zephyrian plasma cannons carved through human vessels, but each destroyed ship seemed to inspire 2 more to take its place. Human pilots flew their craft directly into Zephyrian formations, ramming enemy vessels when their weapons failed or ammunition ran out. The most disturbing moment came when a human pilot named Danny Cole found his fighter surrounded by 3 Zephyrian interceptors. Instead of surrendering or attempting to escape, Cole activated his ship's self-destruct mechanism while still inside the enemy formation. The explosion took all 4 vessels, and Cole's final transmission was heard across all frequencies. "See you in hell, you alien bastards." Sub-Admiral Drexcall finally broke through Earth's orbital defenses, but the cost had been enormous. The Third Fleet had lost 30% of its ships to what should have been a minor skirmish. The surviving Zephyrian vessels began bombardment of major human population centers, expecting quick surrender once civilian casualties mounted. New York burned. London was reduced to rubble. Tokyo disappeared under plasma fire. Millions of humans died in the first day of orbital bombardment, yet no surrender came from Earth's governments. Instead, something else happened that chilled Kethfer to his core. The humans became angry. President Helen Carter addressed the Zephyrian fleet directly. Her broadcast transmitted on all frequencies. She was an older woman with gray hair and eyes like ice, speaking from what appeared to be an underground bunker. "You have attacked our world without provocation," President Carter said calmly. "You have murdered our people and destroyed our cities. You believe this will make us surrender. You are wrong. You have just taught us that mercy is weakness. We will remember this lesson." The transmission ended, and Sub-Admiral Drexcall prepared for the formal surrender that military doctrine said must come after such devastating losses. Hours passed. Then days. No surrender came. Instead, human resistance began to organize on the surface. Reports came in from landing parties that civilian populations were not fleeing from Zephyrian forces. They were moving toward them with improvised weapons and homemade explosives. Kethfer looked around the council chamber, seeing the fear in alien faces that mirrored his own memories. "We thought we were conquering them," he whispered. "We did not realize we were teaching them how to hate." Cuthbert's voice grew quieter as he continued his testimony before the Galactic Council. His memories of the next phase of the war were darker, filled with horrors that still visited him in his sleep. The council members leaned forward, sensing that the worst was yet to come. 3 months after we landed on their world, Kethfer began, we thought we had won. Our forces controlled every major city. Human military resistance had been crushed. Their governments had fallen or gone into hiding. We established occupation zones and began the process of integrating Earth into the Zephyrian Empire. The purple alien paused, his four hands clenching into fists. We did not understand that for humans, military defeat was just the beginning of war. Kethvar had been stationed in the Western Occupation Zone, overseeing the conquered territory. That humans called California. The region was strategically important because of its technology centers and manufacturing facilities. The Zephyrians planned to use human industry to support their expansion into other star systems. For the first month, everything seemed normal. Human civilians went about their daily lives under Zephyrian supervision. They worked in factories, maintained infrastructure, and followed occupation protocols without significant resistance. The few incidents were minor: graffiti on walls, occasional equipment sabotage, nothing that suggested organized opposition. Then Colonel Amy Turner appeared. Turner was a former human military officer who had supposedly died in the orbital bombardment of Los Angeles. Intelligence reports confirmed her death, yet somehow she was alive and organizing civilian resistance across the entire occupation zone. She was a tall woman with blonde hair and scars across her face from plasma burns, moving through the occupied territory like a ghost. Colonel Turner should not have existed, Kethvar told the council. According to our psychological profiles, humans were individual creatures who would submit to authority once their leadership was eliminated. Turner proved that humans could create new leadership from nothing. The first sign of organized resistance came when a Zephyrian supply convoy disappeared between San Francisco and Los Angeles. The 40-vehicle convoy simply vanished without sending a distress signal. Search teams found the convoy 3 days later in a valley that had been turned into a killing ground. Every Zephyrian vehicle had been destroyed by explosives planted along the road. The alien soldiers had been killed by projectile weapons firing from concealed positions in the surrounding hills. Most disturbing of all, the Zephyrian equipment had been stripped from the wreckage and hauled away by human salvage. Teams. Engineer Pete Collins led the human salvage operations. He was a middle-aged man with gray hair and calloused hands who had worked in electronics manufacturing before the invasion. Collins had figured out how to reverse engineer Zephyrian energy weapons from battlefield debris, turning alien technology against its creators. Within weeks, Collins and his team were producing improvised explosive devices using Zephyrian power cells. The aliens discovered their own energy sources being used to destroy their patrols and supply lines. Human fighters carried weapons that fired Zephyrian plasma bolts alongside their primitive projectile guns. They learned faster than we thought possible, Kethvar explained. Engineer Collins turned our technology into weapons we had never seen before. He created devices that our own scientists said were impossible, combining human engineering with our power systems. The psychological warfare was even more disturbing than the technology theft. Dr. Rachel Stone led a team of human scientists who studied captured Zephyrian biological samples and developed targeted biological weapons. She was a small woman with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see too much, working from hidden laboratories in abandoned subway tunnels. Dr. Stone created bacterial infections that attacked Zephyrian respiratory systems specifically. The diseases spread through alien barracks like wildfire, killing entire units while leaving human civilians completely unaffected. Zephyrian soldiers began dying from illnesses that had never existed before the invasion. More terrifying was how humans distributed these biological weapons. They used children as carriers, sending infected youngsters into Zephyrian compounds to spread disease without the aliens realizing what was happening. The children showed no symptoms but carried death with them wherever they went. Captain Ben Rodriguez specialized in psychological operations that broke Zephyrian morale before physical attacks began. He was a former human military officer who understood that fear was more powerful than bullets. Rodriguez broadcast recordings of Zephyrian soldiers dying, adding human commentary that somehow made the sounds more horrifying than simple screams. Captain Rodriguez knew exactly how to break our minds, Keffer remembered. His broadcasts played the sounds of our own people dying while human voices explained what was happening to them. He turned death into entertainment, making us afraid of our own mortality. The recordings were played on hijacked communication frequencies, forcing Zephyrian soldiers to listen to their comrades' final moments. Rodriguez provided detailed explanations of how each death occurred, describing the weapons used and the tactical decisions that led to each ambush. The broadcast turned every Zephyrian casualty into a lesson for future human operations. What made the psychological warfare truly effective was how Rodriguez personalized each attack. He used captured Zephyrian identification records to address individual soldiers by name during the broadcasts, making each alien feel like a specific target rather than part of an anonymous army. The human resistance also weaponized their own children in ways that violated every principle of civilized warfare. 12-year-old Kevin Walsh became one of dozens of child scouts who provided intelligence for human military operations. Walsh and others like him moved through Zephyrian patrols undetected, gathering information about alien movements and defensive positions. We never suspected the children, Keffer admitted to the council. They appeared innocent and harmless, asking for food or medical attention. We gave them aid because our own culture protected young ones. We did not realize they were counting our weapons and mapping our positions. Kevin Walsh looked like any human child, small, with brown hair and curious eyes that seemed interested in everything around him. He would approach Zephyrian checkpoints, asking for help finding his parents, while secretly memorizing the number of guards and the placement of weapons. Within hours, human artillery would strike those exact positions with devastating accuracy. The Child Intelligence Network was coordinated by retired teacher Martha Bell, who used her knowledge of human education systems to organize young informants across the occupied territories. Bell created a communication network using children as messengers, carrying information between resistance cells without arousing Zephyrian suspicion. The aliens tried to counter these tactics by restricting civilian movement and establishing curfews, but the humans adapted faster than the Zephyrians could respond. Resistance fighters used sewer systems, abandoned buildings, and underground tunnels to move through occupied cities without being detected. Supply Sergeant Linda Gray organized the human logistics network that kept the resistance supplied with weapons and equipment. She was a former military logistics officer who understood how to move materials without leaving traces that Zephyrian intelligence could follow. Gray established hidden supply depots throughout the occupation zone using civilian businesses and private homes as distribution points. Sergeant Gray turned their entire population into a support network, Cuthbert explained. Every human civilian became a potential supplier for their military operations. We could not tell the difference between innocent citizens and active resistance members. The breaking point came during the Battle of Sacramento, when human forces demonstrated their growing tactical sophistication. Major Kate Sullivan led a coordinated attack on the regional Zephyrian command center using weapons and tactics the aliens had never encountered before. Sullivan was a combat engineer who specialized in urban warfare, using the human city's infrastructure as a weapon against the occupying forces. She coordinated simultaneous attacks on power grids, water systems, and communication networks, turning the city itself into a battlefield that favored human defenders. The attack began at dawn with explosive charges, destroying key bridges and overpasses, trapping Zephyrian reinforcements outside the city. Human fighters emerged from buildings and underground positions, engaging alien patrols with a combination of captured energy weapons and improvised explosives. What made the battle Truly terrifying was how humans used their own civilian population as camouflage. Resistance fighters moved through crowds of apparently innocent civilians, appearing only long enough to attack Zephyrian positions before disappearing back into the population. Kethver looked around the council chamber, seeing the horror in alien faces as they imagined their own worlds facing such tactics. "We realized that we were not fighting an army," he whispered. "We were fighting an entire species that had decided we must die." Kethver's breathing became shallow as he prepared to describe the moment when everything changed. The council members could see the fear in his eyes growing stronger as he approached the darkest memories of the war. His voice trembled when he spoke again. "6 months after the invasion began," Kethver said slowly, "we stopped being the hunters. The humans had learned everything they needed to know about warfare from watching us. Then they became something we had never seen before." The turning point came when Major Kate Sullivan captured the primary Zephyrian communication hub in what humans called Colorado. The facility was supposed to be impossible to breach, protected by energy shields and defended by 3 full battalions of Zephyrian elite troops. Sullivan took it in a single night using tactics that still gave Kethver nightmares. Major Sullivan was a compact woman with short black hair and eyes like ice chips. She had been a combat engineer before the invasion, but 6 months of guerrilla warfare had transformed her into something that terrified even her own species. Sullivan moved through battlefields like death itself, appearing where enemies least expected and vanishing before they could respond. Major Sullivan understood something about warfare that we did not, Kethver explained to the council. She realized that the communication hub was not just a target to destroy. It was a weapon she could use against us. Instead of demolishing the captured facility, Sullivan used it to coordinate a planet-wide counteroffensive that caught the Zephyrian occupation forces completely unprepared. For the first time since the invasion began, human resistance cells across Earth received real-time coordination from a central command structure. The humans struck everywhere at once. Supply convoys disappeared on 6 continents. Command posts went silent across dozens of occupation zones. Zephyrian soldiers found themselves cut off from reinforcements and surrounded by enemies who seemed to know their every move before they made it. Admiral Greg Thompson emerged during this chaos as humanity's space naval commander. He was a tall man with gray hair and scars from the early orbital battles, commanding a fleet of captured Zephyrian vessels that had been modified with human weapons and tactics. Thompson's approach to space warfare violated every principle of civilized combat. Admiral Thompson treated entire fleets like ammunition, Kethver remembered. He would sacrifice dozens of ships to destroy a single high-value target, considering the exchange profitable if it advanced human strategic goals. The Battle of Luna demonstrated Thompson's tactical philosophy perfectly. The Zephyrian Second Fleet had established a base on Earth's moon, using it as a staging area for reinforcements and supply operations. Thompson attacked with a force of captured alien vessels that should have been overwhelmed by the superior Zephyrian numbers. Instead of engaging in traditional space combat, Thompson divided his fleet into small groups that attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. Each group contained both human crewed vessels and ships that had been converted into automated missiles using human artificial intelligence systems. The automated vessels were piloted by computer programs that had been taught human tactical thinking. They flew attack patterns that no living pilot would attempt, making kamikaze runs that normal military doctrine considered suicidal. The human AI pilots felt no fear and showed no hesitation, turning space combat into a mathematical problem of maximum damage per vessel lost. Thompson's manned ships followed behind the automated attacks, striking Zephyrian positions that had been weakened by the suicide runs. Human crews fought with the same mechanical precision as their artificial intelligence companions, treating their own lives as acceptable losses if their deaths achieved strategic objectives. the lunar base fell. In 18 hours of continuous combat, the Second Fleet was completely destroyed, and Admiral Thompson had established human control over the space around Earth. The cost was enormous. Thompson lost 80% of his vessels, but he considered the exchange a victory because it eliminated Zephyrian space superiority. On the surface, General Frank Morris was conducting urban warfare that turned human cities into death traps for occupying forces. Morris was a former city planner who understood urban infrastructure better than any military strategist. He transformed New York into a fortress that consumed Zephyrian troops like a living creature. General Morris made their cities into weapons, Cuthbert told the council. Every building became a firing position. Every street became a kill zone. Every tunnel became a pathway for human attacks. The battle for New York lasted 3 months and became the worst nightmare in Zephyrian military history. Morris had prepared the city during the early months of occupation, placing weapons caches and explosive charges throughout the urban area. When the general uprising began, New York became a maze of death that trapped Zephyrian forces inside. Sergeant Maria Santos led human squads that moved through the destroyed city like deadly ghosts. She was a small woman with dark hair who had learned to navigate ruined buildings and collapsed subway systems better than the aliens could follow. Santos and her teams would appear from rubble piles, eliminate Zephyrian patrols, and disappear. Back into the urban wreckage, the humans used the city's infrastructure against their enemies in ways that defied military logic. They flooded subway tunnels to drown Zephyrian troops, then drained the water to move their own forces through the same passages. They collapsed buildings to block alien advances, then used the rubble as concealed fighting positions. Morris coordinated these operations from command posts that moved constantly through the underground systems. He communicated with his units using human children as messengers, sending orders through networks that Zephyrian intelligence could never map or intercept. The most disturbing aspect of the urban warfare was how humans incorporated civilian casualties into their tactical planning. General Morris expected significant losses among non-combatants and built those losses into his strategic calculations. Human civilians were used as bait to draw Zephyrian forces into prepared ambush sites. Commander Steve Parker demonstrated human naval adaptation during the Battle of Lake Michigan. Parker was a former Coast Guard officer who understood how to fight naval battles using civilian watercraft. He transformed the Great Lakes into a naval battlefield using fishing boats, cargo vessels, and pleasure craft that had been converted into warships. Commander Parker turned civilian boats into military vessels overnight, Cuthbert explained. Fishing boats became torpedo platforms. Cargo ships became aircraft carriers. Pleasure craft became patrol boats. Their entire civilian infrastructure became part of their military force. Parker's improvised fleet engaged Zephyrian hovercraft and amphibious assault vehicles, using tactics that no military academy had ever taught. Fishing boats would ram larger alien vessels while cargo ships provided artillery support using improvised weapons systems. The humans fought naval battles using equipment that was never designed for combat. The breakthrough that changed everything came when Dr. Helen Carter cracked Zephyrian encryption codes. Carter was a former computer programmer who had spent months analyzing captured alien communication equipment. She was a quiet woman with brown hair who worked in hidden laboratories, solving mathematical problems that gave humans unprecedented intelligence advantages. Dr. Carter broke our most secure communications, Cuthbert admitted. Suddenly human forces knew our troop movements before our own commanders received their orders. Every Zephyrian operation was compromised before it began. Captain Joe Miller used this intelligence advantage to coordinate ambushes that eliminated entire Zephyrian battalions before they could respond to threats. Miller was a former police detective who understood how to gather information and use it to predict enemy behavior. He turned military intelligence into a weapon that was more devastating than any plasma cannon. Miller's operations followed a pattern that became known throughout the Zephyrian military as the human death spiral. Intelligence provided by Dr. Carter would identify vulnerable alien units. Miller's forces would position themselves along predicted movement routes. When Zephyrian troops arrived, they would find themselves surrounded by enemies who knew exactly when and where they would appear. The ambushes were perfectly coordinated and brutally efficient. Human forces would eliminate entire alien units in minutes, then disappear before reinforcements could arrive. The Zephyrians began to lose entire battalions without ever seeing their attackers or understanding how they had been detected. Supply lines became impossible to maintain as human forces intercepted every convoy and communication. Zephyrian troops found themselves cut off from support, surrounded by enemies who seemed to read their minds, fighting a war they could no longer understand. Kefver looked around the council chamber, seeing the terror in alien faces that mirrored his own memories. "We were no longer fighting a primitive species," he whispered. "We were being hunted by predators who had learned to think like us, then evolved beyond our understanding." Kefver's 4 hands shook violently as he prepared to describe the darkest phase of the war. His purple scales had turned almost black with fear, and his voice dropped to barely a whisper. The council members could sense that what came next would haunt them forever. "By the 2nd year," Kefver began, "we realized the terrible truth. The humans were no longer fighting for survival. They were hunting us for sport." The transformation was complete now. The desperate human defenders had evolved into something that terrified the entire galaxy. They possessed technology stolen from a dozen alien species, tactics refined through brutal experience, and a mindset that treated warfare as their natural state of existence. Colonel Ryan Clark led the first human expeditionary forces beyond Earth, striking Zephyrian supply bases on Mars and Europa using captured alien vessels. Clark was a former Marine officer who had learned to fight in the vacuum of space as easily as on planetary surfaces. His raiders moved through the solar system like wolves hunting prey. "Colonel Clark did not attack our bases to capture supplies," Kefver explained to the Silent Council. "He attacked them to test human capabilities against different types of targets. We were laboratory subjects for their military experiments." Clark's forces used captured Zephyrian ships that had been modified with human weapons and technology. The vessels looked like standard alien craft from the outside, allowing them to approach Zephyrian installations without raising suspicion. Only when the attacks began did the defenders realize they were facing human crews. The raids were conducted with precision that violated several Galactic War conventions that humans had never agreed to follow. Clark's teams would eliminate entire base populations, leaving no survivors to report their tactics or capabilities. The attacks were designed to gather intelligence about Zephyrian military procedures, while denying the aliens any information about human methods. What made the raids truly terrifying was how Clark treated captured Zephyrian personnel. Instead of killing them quickly, his forces would study alien behavior under extreme stress, learning how different species reacted to various forms of psychological pressure. The humans were building databases of alien weaknesses for future use. The Siege of Denver showcased human endurance that defied biological possibility. Lieutenant Eva Torres held underground positions for 8 months without resupply, leading a force of civilian volunteers who had been transformed into hardened soldiers. Through continuous combat experience, Torres was a former teacher who had learned warfare through necessity, but 8 months of underground fighting had changed her into something that frightened even other humans. She moved through tunnel systems that had been carved from solid rock, commanding troops who survived on captured alien rations and recycled equipment. Lieutenant Torres proved that humans could survive in conditions that would kill any other species, Kefver remembered. Her forces lived underground like moles, emerging only to attack our supply lines and communication centers. The Denver tunnel network had been expanded using human engineering techniques combined with captured Zephyrian excavation equipment. Torres and her teams created a three-dimensional battlefield beneath the city, with fighting positions connected by passages that allowed rapid movement between attack points. The humans used the tunnels to conduct surprise attacks on surface positions, appearing through hidden entrances to strike Zephyrian patrols and installations. After each attack, they would disappear back underground before reinforcements could arrive, leaving the aliens to fight an enemy they could not see or locate. When Zephyrian reinforcements finally broke through to the tunnel systems, they discovered that Torres had prepared for this possibility. The entire underground network was rigged with explosives that could be detonated remotely, turning the tunnels into death traps for advancing alien forces. Torres waited until the maximum number of Zephyrian troops had entered the tunnel system, then triggered the explosives simultaneously. The detonation collapsed several city blocks, creating a crater that could be seen from orbit. Thousands of alien soldiers died instantly, buried under millions of tons of rubble and concrete. Captain Tony Adams perfected human boarding tactics that turned space combat into close-quarters horror. Adams was a former ship engineer who understood vessel layouts and life support systems better than most military officers. His boarding teams could seize alien vessels from within using techniques that neutralized Zephyrian technological advantages. Captain Adams turned our own ships into prisons, Cuthbert told the council. His teams would board our vessels and hunt our crews through the corridors like animals. Adams specialized in what humans called silent boarding operations. His teams would approach Zephyrian vessels using small craft that were nearly invisible to alien sensors, attaching to hull sections that contained maintenance access ports. The boarding parties would enter through these openings without triggering security systems. Once inside alien vessels, Adams's teams moved through ship corridors with weapons designed for close-quarters combat. They used sound suppressors and non-lethal gases to eliminate ship crews without damaging vital systems. The goal was to capture vessels intact while leaving no survivors to report human boarding techniques. The boarding operations were conducted with methodical efficiency that resembled industrial processes more than military actions. Adams's teams would secure specific sections of each vessel in predetermined sequences, isolating crew members and eliminating resistance with mechanical precision. What made the boarding actions truly horrifying was how Adams treated captured vessels afterward. The ships were not just stolen, they were studied completely, with every system analyzed and every piece of technology reverse-engineered for human use. The aliens' own vessels became tools for studying their creators. The horror reached its peak when Dr. Paul Wright developed biological weapons that converted alien biomass into resources for human war production. Wright was a former agricultural scientist who understood how to manipulate biological processes on an industrial scale. His laboratories produced weapons that turned the enemy's own bodies into ammunition and equipment. Dr. Wright created weapons that did not just kill us, Cuthbert whispered. They recycled our bodies into materials for human military use. Death became a form of industrial processing. Wright's biological weapons were designed to break down alien tissue at the molecular level, converting the resulting material into compounds that could be used in human manufacturing processes. Entire Zephyrian colonies were consumed by these weapons. Their populations literally transformed into resources for human war production. The weapons spread through alien populations like diseases, but instead of simply killing their victims, they converted organic material into useful compounds. Zephyrian bodies became sources of rare elements and complex molecules that human industry needed for advanced technology production. The process was designed to be self-sustaining and self-spreading. Once introduced to an alien population, Wright's Biological weapons would continue converting biomass until nothing organic remained. Entire worlds became lifeless industrial sites that continued producing materials for human use long after their original inhabitants were gone. Sergeant Lisa Kim led demolition teams that weaponized geology itself, using human engineering techniques to turn planetary features into massive weapon systems. Kim was a former mining engineer who understood how to move earth and stone on scales that could reshape landscapes. Sergeant Kim made the planets themselves into weapons, Cuthbert explained. She could collapse mountain ranges and redirect rivers to destroy our military positions. Kim's most devastating operation occurred during the Battle of Montana, where 3 Zephyrian divisions had established fortified positions in a mountain valley that was considered impregnable. The alien forces controlled the high ground and had clear fields of fire across all approach routes. Instead of attacking the fortifications directly, Kim's demolition teams spent 2 weeks placing explosive charges at key geological stress points throughout the mountain range. The charges were positioned using detailed geological surveys that identified the exact locations where maximum damage could be achieved with minimum explosive material. When the charges detonated simultaneously, the entire mountain range collapsed. Into the valley below, 3 divisions of Zephyrian troops, over 30,000 soldiers, were buried instantly under billions of tons of rock and debris. The explosion registered on seismic detectors across the continent. The demolition created a new landscape feature that remained visible from space years later. What had been a mountain valley became a rubble-filled crater that stretched for dozens of kilometers. No trace remained of the Zephyrian fortifications or their defenders. Kim's teams had turned the planet's own geological structure into a weapon system that could eliminate entire armies with a single coordinated attack. The humans had weaponized the ground beneath their enemies' feet. Cuthbert looked around the council chamber, seeing the absolute terror in alien faces as they imagined their own worlds facing such tactics. "We finally understood what we were fighting," he said in a voice filled with horror. Humans had not been defending their world. They had been learning how to destroy ours. Cuthbert's voice was barely audible now as he prepared to describe the end of everything his species had believed about warfare and civilization. The council chamber was completely silent, every alien representative understanding that they were hearing about their own possible future. His final words would haunt them forever. "The war did not end with human surrender," Cuthbert whispered. "It ended with our species fleeing in terror from a world that had become a nightmare beyond imagination." The final phase began when Commander Jack Scott led the human offensive that shattered the last Zephyrian orbital defenses around Earth. Scott was a former Navy pilot who had learned to command fleets using principles that no military academy had ever taught. His approach to space warfare combined human engineering with alien technology in ways that violated the basic laws of physics as the Zephyrians understood them. Scott's fleet consisted entirely of vessels that had been built using hybrid human-alien technology. The ships looked wrong to Zephyrian eyes, combining smooth alien hull designs with crude human modifications that somehow made them more effective than either species could achieve alone. The vessels moved in patterns that defied gravitational mechanics and fired weapons that consumed enemy shields faster than they could regenerate. Commander Scott's fleet used weapons that our scientists said were impossible, Cuthbert explained. To the Council, they had found ways to combine our energy systems with their projectile weapons, creating hybrid technologies that were more powerful than anything either species had developed separately. The final space battle lasted only 6 hours, but it destroyed every remaining Zephyrian vessel in the solar system. Scott's forces used coordinated attacks that struck multiple targets simultaneously, overwhelming alien defensive systems through sheer volume of firepower rather than technological superiority. What made the battle truly devastating was how Scott's Fleet recovered and recycled destroyed enemy vessels during the combat itself. Human salvage teams would board damaged Zephyrian ships while the battle continued around them, stripping useful technology and converting captured vessels into additional weapons platforms. Within hours. By the end of the engagement, Scott commanded twice as many ships as he had started with, all of them crewed by humans who had learned to operate alien technology better than its original designers. The Zephyrian orbital presence around Earth was completely eliminated, and human forces controlled all space-based installations in the solar system. The peace negotiations were conducted by General Patricia Wood, whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was known throughout the galaxy by this point. Wood was a career diplomat who had been transformed by 2 years of total war into something that terrified even neutral species. Her very presence at the negotiating table was enough to secure favorable terms for humanity. General Wood did not negotiate, Kethver remembered. She dictated terms while we begged for mercy. The negotiations took place on a neutral space station that had been established by the Galactic Council for exactly this type of situation. Wood arrived with a small diplomatic team and a detailed list of demands that would have been considered impossible before the war began. The Zephyrians would pay massive reparations to humanity for the damage caused during the invasion. They would cede control of 12 star systems that contained strategic resources useful for human expansion. They would provide technological data that would accelerate human development by centuries. Most importantly, they would guarantee that no alien species would ever again attempt to invade human territory. Wood presented these demands with calm professionalism, explaining that they were non-negotiable and that rejection would result in human forces extending their operations to Zephyrian home worlds. The diplomatic team included detailed military analyses showing exactly how human fleets would conduct planetary assault operations against civilian populations. The negotiations lasted 3 days, with the Zephyrians desperately trying to reduce the scope of human demands. Wood listened politely to their proposals, then explained why each modification was unacceptable. The humans had done their research thoroughly and knew exactly what the Zephyrian Empire could afford to lose without collapsing completely. When the peace treaty was finally signed, the Zephyrians had agreed to every human demand and several additional concessions that Wood added during the final negotiations. The empire that had once controlled 47 worlds was reduced to a regional power that existed at human convenience. Kethver paused in his testimony, gathering strength for the most disturbing revelation of all. The council members leaned forward, sensing that the worst was yet to come. "We discovered the truth during those negotiations," Kethver said slowly. The humans had not been fighting for survival after the first year. They had been fighting for sport. The revelation came when General Wood explained human strategic thinking during informal discussion between negotiation sessions. She described the invasion as humanity's first opportunity to test their military capabilities against galactic standard technology and tactics. The war had been an educational experience that taught humans everything they needed to know about alien military doctrine. General Wood told us that we had provided valuable training for human military forces, Kethver explained. She thanked us for the learning opportunity and suggested that future conflicts would be much shorter, because humans now understood how alien species conducted warfare. The humans had been conducting the largest military exercise in their species history, using the Zephyrian invasion as a testing ground for weapons, tactics, and strategic concepts. Every human victory had been an experiment designed to evaluate different approaches to interspecies warfare. What the Zephyrians had interpreted as desperate human resistance was actually a systematic evaluation of alien military capabilities. The humans had deliberately allowed the invasion to continue longer than necessary, using the extended conflict to study Zephyrian technology, psychology, and tactical doctrine. The devastating human counteroffensives had been designed to test specific military theories rather than achieve immediate victory. Human commanders had experimented with different combinations of tactics and weapons, measuring their effectiveness against various types of alien targets. Captain Alan Price now commanded the first human deep space exploration fleet, moving beyond known galactic boundaries to search for new challenges and opportunities. Price was a former civilian astronaut who had been transformed by the war into humanity's primary scout for future expansion. His mission was to identify suitable targets for human colonization and military testing. Captain Price leads fleets that travel farther than any species has ever gone, Cuthbert told the Council. They are not exploring for knowledge, they are hunting for new worlds to conquer. Price's exploration fleets consisted of vessels that combined the best human and alien technologies, creating ships that were superior to anything either species could build alone. The fleets were designed for extended independent operations, carrying everything needed to establish military bases and colonization sites without support from Earth. The exploration missions had secondary objectives that terrified the galactic community. Price's forces were instructed to evaluate any alien species they encountered as potential threats or resources for human expansion. First contact protocols included detailed procedures for military assessment and tactical planning. Dr. Karen Lee led research teams that continued developing weapons by combining human engineering with alien science. Lee was a former academic researcher who had become humanity's primary weapons designer, creating technologies that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible by galactic scientific standards. Dr. Lee creates weapons that we cannot understand, Cuthbert admitted. Her laboratories produce technologies that violate physical laws we thought were absolute. Lee's research facilities operated using hybrid human-alien technology that achieved results neither species could accomplish independently. Her teams worked on projects that ranged from improved spacecraft designs to biological weapons that could target specific genetic markers in alien populations. The most disturbing aspect of Lee's work was how it incorporated lessons learned from the Zephyrian conflict. Every alien species that had been studied during the war provided data for weapons designed to exploit their specific biological and psychological weaknesses. Cuthbert looked around the council chamber one final time, seeing the absolute terror in every alien face as they realized the implications of his testimony. The galaxy now faces a species that considers warfare to be their natural state, he concluded. Humans have mastered both their own brutal tactics and our advanced technology. They view entire civilizations as test subjects for their military experiments. We must either accept human dominance or prepare for extinction, because there is no middle ground when dealing with creatures that treat galactic conquest as entertainment. The council chamber remained silent long after Cuthbert finished speaking. Every representative understanding that they had just heard their species' death sentence.